It's my pleasure to be here today and quite relevant for Localintel. In 2015, Localintel started as a very simple idea, and that was the idea that every community, regardless of size, should have the opportunity to access world-leading technology to help with their economic development efforts, to promote their community's advantages, to assist local businesses in the questions that they have, and to monitor economic trends so that economic developers can adapt accordingly. Now, back then, that idea was pretty much about getting in a truck and driving around all of Alberta and meeting many of you and asking you lots of silly questions whilst trying to juggle a family, a mortgage, and a full-time job. And it was through the feedback of many Alberta economic developers and many others that I was able to validate the idea and start building the business in 2016. Many of you have followed the journey that this company has been on. And like any small business, we've had, it's been a roller coaster, plenty of ups and downs, but as I always like to say, we've had more ups than downs, so we're headed in the right direction. And certainly 2020, well, what a year that's been. But it's been fantastic. We've been able to help many new communities. We're retaining and continuing to help many communities as well through these difficult days. Now more than ever, online economic development tools to assist businesses and help them adapt are needed, and we're proud to be doing so, especially in Alberta, being a proud Calgary company. So as of today, we are proud to also say that this Calgary company is now working with over 200 communities across 23 US states and 8 Canadian provinces, ranging in size from the town of Bashaw, go Alberta, through to Texas Economic Development Corporation, Enterprise Florida, Washington, DC Economic Partnership, Invest Ottawa, Calgary Economic Development, and the cities of Cleveland, Seattle, Tulsa, Fort Lauderdale, New Orleans. Pretty impressive list. Anyway, without further ado, let's get into the interesting stuff. And I would like to introduce Michael Denham. He's President and CEO of BDC, as you know, Canada's only bank devoted exclusively to entrepreneurs. He leads a team of 2,300 people across Canada who work every day to help entrepreneurs succeed by providing the guidance and the financial support they need to build resilient, growing businesses. A strong advocate for entrepreneurship and innovation, Mr. Denham drives BDC's positioning as the #1 ally of Canadian entrepreneurs. Having more impact on business owners and being as easy as possible to do business with are among his main priorities at the helm of BDC. And as an entrepreneur, that's good to hear. A seasoned business leader with more than 30 years of senior management experience, Mr. Denham held senior roles at McKinsey, Bombardier, Accenture, and Aquaterra before joining BDC. Based in Montreal since 2001, Mr. Denham is bilingual and holds a Bachelor of Arts from the Woodrow Wilson School of Public and International Affairs at Princeton and a Master of Science in Economics with distinction from the London School of Economics, LSE. Without further ado, thank you.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today and being a part of our EDA conference. Welcome and thanks for being with us.
No, thanks for having me, Trevor. Looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, we really appreciate BDC's support of our conference every year and obviously your partnership. I think most of my peers are probably familiar with BDC, but maybe don't understand the pan-Canadian reach of your organization or the fact that you work with 60,000 entrepreneurs. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the organization and just provide a bit of background context?
Sure, happy to, Trevor. And again, I think this session was supposed to take place back in, I think it was back in June or May, and it was a real disappointment for me that we had to reschedule it, but I'm glad it's been rescheduled. This isn't quite the same type of intimacy as face-to-face, but I know you, as a group, you organize such great events that I know it's going to be worthwhile for all the participants. Again, as a group, you all play such important roles, especially right now. I mean, entrepreneurs are, business people are often kind of lonely, not interacting as much as they would like to with others, kind of thirsty for learning and connections, and your organization, Trevor, and your fellow organizations provide that connectedness. So especially right now, it's hugely important what you're doing. So for me, it's a real pleasure to be able to share my thoughts with you.
Well, and I think many entrepreneurs felt like they were alone in the desert long before this rolled along, and it's just amplified all of those feelings of isolation and some of the challenges of being an entrepreneur.
Well, that's right. That's right. Exactly. So to answer your question, so we have 60,000 clients across Canada, and BDC. For those who don't know us, we're a federal crown corporation. We're self-sustainable, self-funding, so we don't rely on taxpayers' dollars. And we provide loans, investments, and we offer advice, consulting services to our clients. And we've got 2,500 people, 100 odd locations across the country. And Alberta is actually a very important part of BDC and our footprint. We've got 13 locations in Alberta. We've got in excess of $1 billion of loan portfolios. And what we're trying to do right now especially is bring together all the piece parts of BDC to make a difference to the Albertan economy and to entrepreneurs. So our lending organization has been active for a long time. We have a BDC Capital where we do venture capital investing and clean tech investing. They're becoming more and more active. And we're also partnered with a lot of organizations, including CRIN, which a lot of your members would know, the Clean Resource Innovation Network, to help bring to market and help commercialize technologies. So we're really trying to help the many components of the Albertan economy right now.
Well, and such a great reach and such a great perspective, both nationally and across our province. I'm wondering what you're hearing from entrepreneurs, and in particular, what are you seeing as the impacts of COVID-19 on entrepreneurs?
And again, sadly, the story changes every week, and it's not heading in a good direction, as we all know. So let me tell you a bit of a story, Trevor. We had Small Business Week took place a number of weeks ago, and that's something that BDC actually started back in the late 70s, and now, as I think all your colleagues would know, it's a big deal, and there are thousands of activities that take place across the country. I kicked it off with a discussion that I hosted in Montreal with a number of entrepreneurs, but I made a point of having an Albertan entrepreneur, a gentleman called Sammy Hayek from Pitbull Energy Services, joined for the call. And I asked him the question you just asked me. And just to quote him, he said, look, we've been through COVID now several times in Alberta. To make the point that you got your entrepreneurs in Alberta are a resilient lot. They're used to dealing with challenge. And Sammy's point was that's a skill set now that entrepreneurs have been forced to develop, and most have it. That said, the situation in Alberta, as you all would know, versus the rest of Canada, is I guess worse, for lack of a better word. I mean, 65% of jobs lost in March and April have been recovered in Alberta. I was looking at my notes. Versus the national average is close to 80%. The unemployment rate remains, I think it's over 11% now, 11.7%. It was 7%, national average is 9%. So the macro figures, again, aren't coming back as quickly as in other parts of the country. But that said, there are some, the tech sector is doing well, the food processing sector is doing well. Anyone in the logistics world knows the logistics world is busy. But obviously with the oil and gas pricing, the challenges getting to market, et cetera, that represents a challenge for not just folks in the sector, but folks that provide services to the sector and depend on the wealth creation in the sector. So that's really how Alberta stacks up versus the rest of the country.
Yeah, it's a great quote and example of how Alberta's used to that sort of turmoil, and we're certainly seeing those impacts. So appreciate that perspective. Michael, your team's recently done a study sort of understanding how entrepreneurs are adapting to this. And I hate using the words new reality or new normal, but could you talk to us a little bit about the report and perhaps some of the key findings that you found through that research?
Every year, for Small Business Week, we try to do some research, mostly through surveying entrepreneurs. And we put that out there during Small Business Week when people across the country are talking about entrepreneurship and small business. And it's a way to kind of foster a discussion, foster a dialogue, create a national conversation around things that are important for entrepreneurs. And this year, just given the pandemic and the challenges we all face, we asked entrepreneurs a very simple question. And it's really as simple as kind of, what are your priorities for now and in the weeks ahead? And we surveyed well in excess of 1,000 entrepreneurs. And Trevor, what came out of it were 5 highlights or 5 priorities that ended up at the top of the list. And the first, I'll just go through all of them fairly quickly. And for those that want to learn more, it's all available on bdc.ca. But the first is putting finances in order. And there's been so much, and this is both a kind of margin issue, revenues and costs, but it's also a balance sheet issue, because there was so much challenge and uncertainty thrown at entrepreneurs so quickly that folks scrambled, and they did things just to kind of keep themselves going and moving forward. And as a result, there are some balance sheets that aren't quite right. Some companies have constant margin pressure and just aren't able to produce enough margin that they need to move forward. So getting all that kind of sorted out and getting the finances of the business in shape is job number 1 right now. Number 2 is taking advantage of technology. And a lot of folks, Trevor, I think supported or were allowed to do this through the wage subsidy program, and others have had some people, the business has, revenues have been reduced, activities have been reduced. And rather than just as things come back, kind of go back to the way they were, a lot of companies are saying, let's pause a little bit. Let's invest in technology and new platforms. Let's get the base of our business down to the leanest we can. And then with that base in place, then let's fully hire back. And as a result, once that's done, they'll be in a much better, more competitive position for the future. So that's what's driving what we see, this focus on technology now, to make sure that the recovery and the growth takes place on the best possible platform. The third issue is focusing on telework. I don't know about you, but I basically haven't left the house to work since March, for better or worse. And a lot of companies aren't in that situation, but many are. And I think the reality of telework is here to stay. And it doesn't mean 5 days a week from home for everybody. I don't think we're going to go back to 0 days a week away from the office, but there's a hybrid in there somewhere that I think most employees will expect. And I think most employers, as a result, need to prepare for. The fourth one is selling online. And what's interesting is Canada has always been a laggard versus other developed countries in terms of how well penetrated online sales are in this country. And there were orders of magnitude difference versus the US, the UK, and others in terms of transacting online. And there's a staggeringly high number of Canadians that frankly did their first online transaction after March. And guess what? They liked it and they've come back for more. So I think you're going to see that this gap versus other countries is closing. And as a result, selling online is going to become much more, as it should be, frankly, much more of a fixture of our economy. And I think entrepreneurs, both B2B and B2C, so business to business and business to consumer, have realized that. And then the last point, and this applies to not all entrepreneurs, but enough in those sectors that are actually bouncing back, is they are focusing again on growth. And they're looking for acquisition opportunities, looking for expansion opportunities, looking to take advantage of depressed real estate prices in certain markets to expand their footprint. And we see that in our lending activities, whereas there are sectors that are strong, customers that are healthy in those sectors that are looking to grow.
Yeah, to paraphrase Churchill, my wife often uses the quote of "never waste a good crisis." And there are opportunities even when things are at their bleakest. And certainly, it's been an interesting transition. Even a virtual conference for us is an entirely new experience, and we all have to be adaptable. Was there anything in those 5 that really surprised you at all, Michael? Was there anything that stood out as that's an interesting sort of conclusion from business owners?
I think the one that surprised me in a good way was this last one, this focused on growth. And I think if you think about it, it's actually quite natural because there are some parts of the economy that are still going to take some time to get back to where they were. But there are others, frankly, many other sectors that are actually higher in terms of output now than they were. Thinking of technology, healthcare related services, food processing, et cetera. And for companies in those sectors, they should be pursuing growth opportunities because the markets are back. So the more I thought about it, the more it made sense because of this part of the economy that's actually quite healthy right now. But that was the one that at first glance surprised me.
Okay. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, part of BDC's role is not just a lender, you actually do business consulting. And so there's a number of supports that are available to entrepreneurs. So in light of those sort of 5 themes, what supports could entrepreneurs access through BDC? And could you walk us through some of the programs that might be available?
So we have a lot of, speaking honestly, really good tools and articles that we have on bdc.ca they're just there to be used. They're free. They reflect research we've done, hands-on experience our consultants have, and they're written up, Trevor, in a way to be very kind of practical and applicable on topics like cash flow management, going online, international expansion, operational efficiency. So for anyone who's listening or watching who is interested about in a real kind of how-to way to learn about how to act on these fronts and others, there is a ton of stuff in bdc.ca that I encourage people to take advantage of. And then on our advisory services business line within BDC, we do a range of for-fee consulting. It's not particularly expensive in some cases. For small companies, it's very kind of bite-sized and affordable. But as part of that as well, we put in place a new program, which we call an Access program, which is basically designed to provide, again, for free, kind of real-time advice from our experienced consultants, kind of by phone or Zoom link, whatever suits, for very specific business problems folks are trying to tackle. And we just thought now with just all the needs that entrepreneurs are faced with, it was a shift in resource for us to make. But seriously, bdc.ca, it really is helpful. And it also provides links to other providers of perspective that I think a lot of people watching would find interesting.
Well, that's great. I mean, a resource like a website that's easy to navigate and cultivated content is a lot faster than me searching on my own trying to find some of those resources, right? So now, BDC also did a study looking at diversification and entrepreneurs trying to adapt and pivot specifically to broaden their horizons a little bit. Could you talk to us a little bit about the findings in that study?
Yeah. And so let me go back a little bit. So I started in my role in 2015. I think folks would remember in 2016, there was a massive decline in oil prices, and it was a real shock to the system. So we put in place additional lending amounts of up to about $1 billion that we made kind of more available, more accessible for entrepreneurs that were negatively affected by this shock to the system in 2016. And one of the things that we insisted on as a, not condition, but as an expectation for these loans is that companies would take advantage of the loan to explore ways to diversify their businesses. And I was actually struck, back then in 2016, where I think it was like 45% of clients we surveyed literally had one single client. So this wasn't diversification. Should I sell to China or Taiwan or Japan? This was, should I have a second client? Exactly. And that's trouble. So so it's been something we've had on our minds and been trying to help clients with, not just in Alberta, but elsewhere since then. And the survey we just did and released, and it's on bdc.ca, underscores the importance of diversification and also shows that some progress has been made, but not enough. There are too many entrepreneurs that are too dependent on too few customers. So we think about diversification in customer 1 to customer 2, geography 1 to geography 2, selling into one segment, say residential versus commercial with the same product, shipping to different parts of Canada, shipping to different parts of the world. Depending on your maturity and growth, there are different diversification opportunities for you, but it just produces a much more stable business for everybody, and it's something we encourage. And then just to back that up, the research that we published shows that businesses that are properly diversified, I'm going to just read this as well, twice as likely to weather economic downturn, 3 times more likely to experience high growth, and ones that lag in terms of diversification just get exposed and are particularly exposed when you have economic downturns like what we're experiencing right now. So we think it's very important. It's something we've been trying to educate and raise awareness on for a while. But again, this research, which I encourage folks to read, shows that too many entrepreneurs remain too exposed to their business models that aren't sufficiently diversified.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you for that. And many of our members, obviously, as economic developers, give a lot of advice to business owners and to entrepreneurs. So as you think about that report and you consider, the entrepreneurs that you've seen that are considering new avenues, whether it's new geographies or new customers or new channels, what advice would you give to some of those entrepreneurs as they explore new avenues to diversify?
Well, a couple things. One, I would say that there are some companies right now that really kind of just need to hunker down and kind of get through the next few months and don't have the resourcing or bandwidth to tackle this right now. But once they get through this, and for the others, what I suggest is you always want to kind of play to your existing strengths. So I find the best way, and it depends whether you're diversified partly or not at all. But again, if you're just have one client, you got to fix that, and just begin to kind of make the efforts to kind of sales and market, introduce yourself to other clients. If your product and service is really just being sold into one type of industry or segment, identify other segments where what you do is relevant, and try to find a way to build your customer base there. And for those companies that have multiple clients, multiple segments, sell to multiple parts of Canada, again, at that point, I encourage companies to look internationally to get some international exposure to their business, which again, often has a demand profile that's different to domestic ones. So kind of depends what your starting point is. And I just want to reiterate that some companies really aren't in a position right now to tackle this, but a lot are, and just do it kind of step by step and act in a way that takes out the risk of each incremental move.
Yeah, so I mean, incremental moves and managing risk, of course, are important. Do you have any examples? I mean, you must talk to literally thousands of entrepreneurs every year. Do you have any examples of some success stories where you've seen that diversification work well and where people have managed to navigate those sort of new avenues or channels that they're exploring?
Yeah, and Trevor, I bet you have an awfully long list as well, because I know how good entrepreneurs are in Lethbridge in that community. But I can share with you a few that I know that are from Alberta, and I suspect you and your colleagues would know these companies as well. One is 8 Ounce Coffee in Calgary. Jennifer Wesley Farnell lead it, and they were a business that was entirely kind of face-to-face business. And when COVID kicked in, they lost very quickly about 90% of the revenues. But they had a nascent online capability that they were able to kind of ramp up very quickly to reestablish themselves both B2B, but also gave them a chance to enter the consumer business because of the online capability. So they had the means to diversify their sales channels into online. And just given the nature of their values and how they work, the moves they made were done in very kind of proper and forward-looking collaboration with other roasters and other coffee-related players in their world. So it allowed the entire community to kind of move forward together, which is very important. Another example is Strongfield Environmental Solutions up in Lacombe, not far from Grand Prairie. And Wade McLean's the owner. And that's a business that has diversified through technology. And it's in the weed spraying business, have traditionally focused on oil and gas. And just through its international presence and open-mindedness, it learned of the application of drone technologies in Asia to really enhance the safety, which is a big deal, and the speed and efficacy of weed spraying. Now, as we speak, that's not legal yet in Canada. It's legal in the US, where the company's doing it, but they're organized now to deploy kind of drone-based technology into kind of different segments and different parts of the economy. So again, they've identified a technology that can be directly used or adjacently used, and are making a good run of it. And then lastly, a company called Risk Alive that a lot of you know, analytics company again, through the crisis, we diversified its business in many ways, but one was from selling direct to its business customers to selling to other service providers who then in turn sell to business customers. So it was diversification in terms of channel to market, and that served them very well. So I've been actually quite heartened, as I'm sure you have been, with just the resourcefulness and the creativity when it comes to finding ways to grow through diversification as a result of the challenges that all these businesses faced because of COVID.
I think I've been impressed too with some of the collaboration amongst so-called competitors that are looking for ways to partner and do things together, which is encouraging. That often breeds better competition overall too, I think.
That's right. That's right.
I want to shift gears a little bit here and sort of circle back to the original findings around leveraging technology. I mean, some of the examples you just gave talk about how they've diversified through these technology platforms, but consumers seem to be really embracing technology and partly by requirement. As you said, it's been a long time locked in my house before I've interacted with other humans, so thank you for joining me today. But how do you see the pandemic shifting consumer behaviors, and how do you see the pandemic perhaps long-term impacts on how businesses interact with their customers? Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I always it's a good question, and I always avoid and encourage people to avoid to make too many kind of long-term projections in the middle of whatever the moment is. But there are a few things that are clear. One is the point that you made, which is online purchasing more than ever is buying is here to stay. And that doesn't necessarily mean, nor do I intend it to mean, we're going to be buying all of our stuff from Amazon and these big global giants. It means there are lots of opportunities for local companies with their loyal customer bases to connect with those customers digitally rather than face to face. So this is something that I don't actually see as a threat to entrepreneurs. I see it as a real opportunity to kind of lock in their customer base and expand. So that's clearly one. I think a second one that a lot of people are thinking about is what it implies in terms of supply chains. And this is in part pandemic related. It's partly driven by geopolitics. But for decades, we've been on this theme of leaning out, having super efficient global supply chains with limited redundancy, et cetera. And what we're seeing is in a world where there are concerns about pandemic and where geopolitical tensions rise, this kind of hyper lean single global supply chain represents some risk. And a lot of larger companies are diversifying that risk through changing their supply chains. And a lot are quite explicitly putting in place primary or redundant supply chains much closer to home. And that tends to mean opportunities for smaller companies. So that's another, I think, shift, supply chain shift that should be interesting for a lot of companies in Alberta. And then the third shift, I think, which was ongoing and may just get accelerated by this, is a preference folks have to buy locally. I think the pandemic has made us more aware, I believe, and sensitive to the fact that supporting local small businesses is actually very important to keep our communities vibrant. And a lot of us are also reassured by just the line of sight effect that we have to companies in our local area. So I do think that's a third trend that's going to continue to play itself out. But again, I always try to hold back a little bit and be too definitive, given that we're just, frankly, fairly early days in the effects of this pandemic.
Yeah, the only good forecast is the one you don't have to make, right? Because that's the only reliability you have. It's fair warning. But with that in mind, think about us as economic developers providing advice to business owners. Do you see ways for us to support these businesses and entrepreneurs to take advantage of these trends? Is there specific thoughts that either you or BDC have relative to leveraging these three things you pointed out?
Well, I think there's so many positive things that your organizations can do. I think because you get a critical mass of local businesses and you have such good reputations and good brands, is one key thing is educational. and making sure you connect your members to some of these trends and others that are going on so they can in turn seize opportunities. I think too, you can facilitate, as you've always done, the local business relationships, local transactions in this kind of buy local theme that I was describing. And thirdly, I think, especially when it comes to online and things that are really net new and unnecessarily intimidating for some folks, again, I think you can, through your networks and connections and even some basic facilitation and consulting, help folks take the first couple of steps in that direction, and as a result, prepare themselves. But there's so many ways that you help already that you can help even more in light of these trends and others. There's no question.
No, thank you for that. And clearly, we're all looking for ways to be better supporters and better encouragers of local business. Yeah, if you're speaking to entrepreneurs today, perhaps have gotten through the initial phase of COVID, they're maybe worried about a second wave or a second surge. You know, what do you think are some of those key business steps that they need to take in order to survive kind of into this next phase? And I mean, you talked about balance sheet, you talked about some of these immediate steps that were taken. Do you see that being the same now, or have things shifted slightly? What does a business owner do, you know, for the next 3-4 months? What does that look like?
So when I talk to entrepreneurs and clients of ours about this, I tend to answer it via a couple of categorizations, because there is, again, one category, one group of industries that are robust, where companies are robust. And for that group, I just encourage them to kind of get organized to take advantage of opportunities. And even though a lot of the kind of macro headlines are fairly negative, for these companies and these industries, there are real growth opportunities. So we would encourage them to think that way, have their antennae tuned, look for real estate for expansion, look for new markets to enter, look for companies to acquire, and take advantage, as you say, of what's going on right now to grow and position yourself for more growth going forward. But there's a second category of companies that think tourism, think accommodation, that really are faced with economic challenges for potentially many months. And the first thing that all these companies should do, and most have done it, is take full advantage of the government programming that's been put in place. I know there's a lot of active work at a provincial level in Alberta. Federally, you have the wage subsidy program. You have the CEBA program, which they're topping up. You have the revised rent relief and fixed cost coverage, which has been upgraded. And there's a lot of grant money there and interest-free lending that should be the starting point for all entrepreneurs. So again, most folks know that, but I want to really encourage folks to keep that number one. And then number two, for these companies, I think it is very important to, in a very honest way, look at scenarios for your business and the cash flows that result from those scenarios, so that if there is going to be an issue around your cash flows and your ability to kind of pay your obligations, you want to find a way to know that as early as possible, so you can act accordingly. And too many folks that I know take a bit of a wishful thinking orientation when it comes to cash flow management to kind of convince themselves there'll be a kind of smooth path through. You can do that and it feels good. What you really need to do is take a much more pessimistic yet realistic view on your cash flow so that you can see problems before they arrive. And that's the second thing that we encourage clients that are going to face challenges in the months ahead to make sure they do.
Yeah, you almost need to be your own worst enemy when it comes to cash flow forecasting and assume the worst, right? And just
right. And that's where teams come in handy. A lot of companies, you know, Trevor, have advisory boards. That's the role of advisory boards, to ask those awkward questions you don't really want to answer, but for the sake of the business, need to be answered.
Right. Now, I would imagine BDC itself has had to undergo some changes and sort of reactions to this new reality and different ways of working. I mean, I'm incredibly proud of my team that's been working largely by remote for many months. Could you talk a little bit about your own organization and sort of lessons learned, if you will, from BDC's perspective on kind of how the pandemic's impacted your guys as an organization?
So what happened, I think, for all of us is it was Friday, March the 12th, I think. where we basically agreed it was decided that we'd go into lockdown mode. And then literally Monday morning at 9, we stood every one of our 2,500 employees up to work from home. And it's one of those things you model and you simulate and you plan in all your disaster recovery scenarios. But deep down, there's a little bit of a question, is this going to work? So sure enough, 9 a.m. Monday, the lights went on everywhere. The computers worked. All the connectivity was almost flawless. So from that day, every single employee has been working remotely. We've opened up most of our business centers outside of Quebec and Ontario. We've capped capacity at 25%. We've done that so that if some folks just don't have a productive setup at home, they have some place to go, but it's entirely voluntary, and we just encourage people to do what is right and safest, but it's an option that folks can now pursue. And then what happened was, if folks remember, back in late March, as we collectively tried to figure out what to do to support business, the first thing the government announced was a recapitalization of both BDC and EDC to ensure credit to keep flowing. So big surprise, that led to a huge demand on us. And literally from the last week in March, first week in April, we get as many requests for loans as we literally get in a full year. And we knew the situation was, it was intense. Entrepreneurs were, I think with reason, kind of panicked. They needed reassurance that the money would come. So we literally took 300 of our people from advisory services and some of our back office functions and basically made them frontline lenders to address that massive surge in demand. So in retrospect, we did our best. We moved as many folks as we could. We responded as best we could. I don't think we responded as quickly as a lot of folks wanted us to. But by the time we got to June or so, we were kind of back to business as usual. Folks went back to their day jobs. But what heartened me was our folks are motivated so much by wanting to do what is best for entrepreneurs, to support entrepreneurs. So they went above and beyond to do their best to do that. So that was pretty intense. And now we're in a situation, Trevor, where there's been so much support from various governments as interest-free loans or grants. The demand for what we provide, which is basically credit, is a little bit soft right now because of the support entrepreneurs are getting from these other, frankly, more attractive sources economically. But we're organized, we're ready, and as and when that demand for credit goes back up, we'll be here for what entrepreneurs need.
Well, congratulations to a great response to an unprecedented event, and like you said, simultaneous surge in demand for services and programs. So that's great. I'm conscious of your time, and as we go to wrap up here, I just wondered if there's any final advice you'd leave for us as economic developers in either ways we can support entrepreneurs or sort of final words and advice to us as a group and as professionals supporting the Alberta's economic recovery.
Just what I've said, all your organizations play such important roles. You're a source of knowledge, you're a source of connectivity, you're a source of uplift and morale raising. And just recognize that there are many, many entrepreneurs in your province that really feed on that and benefit from that. So just recognize that what you do is extremely important, will be extremely important until we get through this, which may be a while, and just keep doing what you're doing.
Well, thank you for that. And Michael, my privilege to speak with you today, and I thank you so much for being a part of our conference and for BDC's continued support. Very much appreciated.
Well, thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And finally, I'll also say thank you to Localintel for sponsoring this session. Localintel, like BDC, a very important partner of both EA and our annual conference. We thank both of you, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the sessions. Thanks so much for your time. Thank you, Michael.